The cratered moon of Virex. 9 was a graveyard. Scorched metal fragments smoked under the pale, bitter sky, and the smell of ionized blood clung to the thin, toxic air. Sergeant Rourke pressed his back to the charred remains of a downed shuttle, blood matting the side of his face, his breathing labored and raspy. A pulse burned through his shoulder, torn open by a plasma burst an hour earlier, but he kept his grip firm on the rifle nestled against his chest. Around him, what remained of Delta 9 was scattered among debris and corpse piles, both human and alien. Corporal Mace was lying face down under a broken wing strut, slowly blinking through a film of red. Sergeant Ox Garland sat upright against a slab of rockcrete, his thigh nearly shredded to the bone, but his jaw clenched against the pain, rifle still trained on the distant ridge. "Contact 270, whispered Private Nilsson through the comms, voice low calm. 4 hostiles closing fast. They're not hiding anymore." Rourke didn't answer immediately. He could hear it too. Heavy armored footfalls crunching over slag and dust. The Galactic Shock Troopers weren't trying to be subtle. They were celebrating. One of them, voice twisted with digital distortion, laughed over the open frequency in broken Terran dialect. "Human worms still alive? Crawling in the dirt like insects? No honor in this, just clean up." Mace stirred. "They're mocking us." Rourke's voice was gravel. "Let them. They've never fought Green Berets before." The Galrun had ambushed their infiltration drop 2 clicks from the weapons facility. Within minutes, their shuttle had been turned into burning wreckage. Reinforcements were never coming. The comms relay had been fried by a precision EMP shot, and orbital scans showed the entire sector crawling with Galrun patrols. The mission was dead, but Delta 9 wasn't. Nilsson moved like smoke across the rubble, dragging a small crate behind him. Ammunition, salvage from the last supply point. "This is all we've got left." Rourke looked it over. A handful of magazines. 1 concussion grenade. 3 hand-forged blades. A field jury-rigged railgun with 1 shot. It wasn't enough, but it would do. "Make it count," he said. They knew the terrain now. In the last few hours, they'd memorized the broken edges, the dips in the soil, the exposed power lines, and explosive reactive dust pits. They turned every fragment of metal and bone into a snare. The aliens thought they were just finishing the job. But Rourke and his team had learned something else during the chaos. How to bleed an enemy smarter, stronger, and better armed. Ox exhaled a rough laugh. "Hey, Sarge, you remember that op on Darien Prime? The kill zone by the refinery?" "Yeah. This feels worse." Rourke gave a faint grin. "Only difference is, this time we ain't running." The ridge beyond lit up as the Galrun descended. 6 of them in gleaming exo-armor, red visors glowing under the overcast. They moved like apex predators, weapons raised, confident. One paused, scanned the area, and spoke again in that sneering Terran tongue. "No more hiding. Die like warriors, not rats." Ox shifted slightly. "They always talk too much." Rourke gave the signal. Everything changed in that second. The first alien stepped into the ravine and triggered the tripwire. A buried thermite charge went off in a blinding flash, eating through armor in under a second. The second trooper fired blindly, only to have his legs yanked out from under him by a tension line that snapped his exosuit into a steel rebar spike. Then Mace rolled from cover and emptied an entire clip into the third, targeting the weak points behind the neck joints. The Galrun spasmed and fell backwards, twitching in silence. The fourth had barely raised his plasma repeater when Nilsson dropped from a ridge above, burying a blade into the side of the alien's helmet with a grunt. Blood sprayed, violet and steaming. Ox covered the rest, his fire controlled, precise, discipline honed by a decade of off-world deployments. One shot clipped a fleeing Galrun's ankle, sending him sprawling into a crater filled with corrosive vapor. Silence followed. Only the wind, bitter and dry, whispered through the wreckage. 5 Galrun bodies lay broken and smoking. The 6th trooper had fled, bleeding, weapon discarded. Rourke pushed himself upright with a grunt, pain flashing white-hot in his vision. But he didn't falter. He stepped over to the nearest body and pulled the power cell from the Galrun's repeater, sliding it into a pouch. Recon's gonna see this and lose their minds, Mace muttered, wiping blood from his face. They're not gonna see anything unless we survive long enough to tell them, Rourke said. In the distance, a transport ship passed low, scanning. The surviving alien was likely reporting back, calling for reinforcements. The fight wasn't over. It had barely started, but the Galrun had lost something today. Not just troops, not just pride. They had lost the illusion that humans, wounded, cornered, outnumbered, were easy prey. Ox looked up at the darkening sky. More coming. Rourke nodded. Definitely. Good, said Ox, reloading. I was starting to get bored. Mace glanced at the others. How many traps we got left? Not enough, Nilsson said. Rourke turned to face them, jaw tight. Then we make them think we have more. We mislead. We misdirect. We strike where they're weakest. This isn't survival anymore. Nilsson raised an eyebrow. Then what is it? Rourke's eyes were steel. It's punishment. Overhead, clouds rolled in, flashing with distant lightning. The moon's horizon burned orange with the arrival of new drop pods, Galrun reinforcements inbound. But they were walking into a battlefield where the rules had changed. Delta 9, bleeding and outgunned, wasn't trying to win. They were going to make the enemy regret ever laughing. The sky above Virex, 9 cracked with thunder as the next wave of Galrun drop pods screamed through the atmosphere. Black streaks trailed behind them, glowing like meteor fire before slamming into the surface with the weight of gods. Dust and plasma plumed into the air, silhouetting the arrival of more enemy soldiers, armored giants disembarking in precision formations. From the ridge where Delta 9 had held their ground, the humans watched, unblinking. Sergeant Rourke knelt behind a half-collapsed satellite relay dish, studying their movements through a cracked visor scope. Each Galrun trooper looked like a walking fortress, reinforced with segmented exoplate and glowing neural threads down their spines. Not one of them hesitated. Not one of them expected real resistance. 17, no, 18 incoming, Nilsson reported softly, pressed against a shattered concrete wall. And they're not scattering. Straight line advance. They think we're rabbits, Mace muttered, wiping grime off his rifle's scope. Cornered and too scared to run. They're not wrong, Garland rasped, barely audible. His lips were pale, sweat slicking his face despite the cold. Blood soaked through the crude wrap on his leg, and the tourniquet was starting to fail. Rourke didn't look at him. He kept his eye on the enemy and adjusted the scope's zoom. They're overconfident. That's the hole. He spoke the words more to himself and the others, but everyone heard it. They understood. It wasn't just about fighting back anymore. It was about changing the shape of the battlefield, turning raw rage into a weapon. The Galrun had technology and numbers, but they didn't understand what a dying Green Beret could do with desperation and a pocket of dust. Mace checked the charge on the stolen repeater, its interface barely responding to human touch. We still have a drone core. Yeah, Nilsson said. Salvaged from a scout last night. Battery's weak, but the targeting AI's intact. Good, Rourke said. We'll feed it ghost signals, make them think we're spread wider than we are. They'll scan through the trick. Not if we pulse it with proximity bait and bury a few heat decoys. It'll scramble their threat assessment long enough for us to punch. Nilsson gave a slow nod, eyes hardening. We'll need to draw them into the corridor choke, already rigged with spike mines and fallback fangs. We run them into it, Rourke replied. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't give a speech. There was no room for ceremony here. Only cold, calculated violence. It was the kind of thinking that had kept Delta 9 alive through over a dozen black site conflicts Earth never admitted to. A distant clunk sounded, metal against stone. The Galrun had entered the outer perimeter. Time compressed. Mace moved first, bolting toward a shattered trench line that formed part of the artificial canyon. His silhouette disappeared into smoke. Nilsson followed low and fast, sliding down a ridge of ash and bone. Rourke stayed with Garland, setting the older man's rifle at the perfect angle. You hold this lane, Rourke said. Don't fire unless they're on top of you. Garland smiled without humor. Been dying to bleed one of these bastards up close. Then Rourke was gone, vanishing like a wraith through smoke and fire. Below, the Galrune moved with machine-like confidence. Scanning beams fanned out in synchronized patterns. HUD overlays tracked movement, infrared, and residual body heat. Their squad leader, a towering brute with embedded shock tendrils in its helmet, gave a low clicking signal. The formation spread into combat mode, guns raised, assuming superiority. But they didn't see the tripwires beneath the crushed hulls. They didn't hear the motion-triggered spikes behind the ridge. They didn't notice the still-warm armor fragments rigged to distract their sensors. The trap snapped shut. The first explosion wasn't large. It was precise, directed charges that collapsed a slope, burying 3 aliens in burning rubble. One screamed, a sound that vibrated unnaturally, before being silenced by a follow-up blast. 2 more stepped into the corridor choke, just as the drone core pulsed its ghost signal, 10 meters to their left. They pivoted, confused, their targeting HUDs dancing with false warnings. That's when Rourke and Mace opened fire. Human rifles barked, raw and vicious. One Galrune staggered, his helmet cracking, and stumbled into a fong mine. Bladed spikes punched upward through his gut and out his back, flinging armor shards in every direction. Nilsson emerged from cover and launched the repurposed railgun. One charge shot that pierced 2 enemies before embedding in the canyon wall, where it detonated, turning rock and flesh into a thunderous slurry. Garland, pale and shaking, held his fire until 3 Galrune flanked left, thinking it a safe path. He pulled the trigger once, just once, and dropped one with a neck shot. The second was blinded by the blast and clawed at his own helmet. The third finally noticed the human, charged him. But Garland had taken off his own armor plate and wired it to a breacher mine across his chest. When the alien reached him, the explosion painted the canyon with flame. Silence fell again. Then a single Galrune soldier, eyes wide behind his cracked visor, turned and ran. Mace, breathing hard, lowered his rifle. That's the 3rd one today that's run. They're starting to get it, Nilsson said quietly. Rourke's face was blank. Not fast enough. He stood, surveying the wreckage. 8 Galrune dead. 1 Green Beret lost. But more were coming, and the moon wouldn't protect them forever. The drone core was sparking now, barely functioning. The stolen weapons had half a charge. They were running out of tricks. And still they stood. The humans regrouped in the canyon center. Mace unwrapped a piece of ration protein from his vest pouch and chewed mechanically, staring into the smoke. You think they'll stop laughing now? He asked. No, Rourke said. Not yet. Then we keep hurting them. Rourke looked out at the path the last alien had fled through. We make them afraid to speak. Above them, distant shadows moved, dark shapes descending from orbit. The enemy still believed this moon was theirs. They were still sending troops, still broadcasting victory reports to the Galactic Council. That illusion would die soon, because 4 Green Berets remained, and not one of them planned to go quietly. Night fell on Virex, 9 like a steel curtain. The moon's overhead bled pale blue light across the ruined valley, where the remnants of Delta 9 waited like ghosts. Every crackle of ash, every low-frequency hum from distant alien machinery reverberated through their nerves like phantom pain. The ground trembled now with the movement of something heavier, more deliberate than before. This wasn't a reconnaissance patrol or a sweep team. The Galrune were sending in their elite, shock commandos known in the Terran Black dossiers as the Brutes. Rourke crouched beside a half-buried Galrune wreck, one hand pressing a field dressing deeper into Mace's ribcage. The corporal's breaths were short, ragged, and each exhale came with a wet, gurgling sound. The plasma hit had just missed the heart, but it didn't miss much else. You're not done yet, Rourke said. Mace managed a blood-flecked grin. You always were a terrible liar, Sarge. Rourke didn't smile. Save your air. We'll need you when they breach. Less than 20 meters away, Nilsson worked like a surgeon over the cracked shell of a fallen alien exosuit. His fingers, blistered and blackened from plasma burns, traced open circuits and adjusted jury-rigged detonators with brutal efficiency. Sweat dripped from his brow. A single mistake would light the whole setup prematurely. He didn't care. Every trap, every charge, every death was the only language the Galrun respected, and they still hadn't learned to fear it. Movement. Across the valley, 6 figures emerged through the fire haze, taller than normal Galrun soldiers, broader at the shoulders, with fused armor that pulsed faintly, as if alive. Their steps crushed stone. Their helmets bore no visors, just sculpted bone-like plating with grotesque, etched runes. These were not soldiers. These were executioners. Rourke stared down at them through his scope. They weren't laughing. They finally stopped underestimating us, he muttered. Nilsson snapped the last component in place and armed the charge. Took long enough. He slid back into cover beside Rourke. They're not spreading. Moving together. They want us dead, Rourke said. All at once. No more games. Garland grunted from his position further back. Voice weak, but intact. Then we don't play either. The plan was simple. It had to be. The brutes would breach through the corridor funnel, armored too thick for normal munitions. But beneath the stone walkway was a chain of pressure-linked microcharges, each one rigged with delayed triggers and wrapped in repurposed Galrun core fragments. If timed perfectly, they'd crack the ground out from under the advancing line and bury them in their own overconfidence. But it would only work once. Rourke took the detonator, adjusted the dial. Wait for my call. Not a second sooner. He moved to higher ground, crawling across twisted steel girders and mangled alien bones. Each breath felt heavier. The cold was deep now, seeping through flesh and armor alike. He reached a vantage point and froze. The brutes had stopped. They stood just outside the choke point, shoulder to shoulder, as if sensing something wrong. One turned its head slightly. It sniffed the air. Then it raised a massive rifle the size of a Terran autocannon and fired into the canyon wall. The blast sheared the rock apart, revealing one of the pressure lines beneath. They weren't falling for it. Adapted fast, Nilsson hissed. Too fast. Rourke didn't hesitate. He changed the dial. Plan B. He grabbed the old Galrun targeting drone from the bag beside him, activated its optical bait loop, and hurled it out toward the brute's position. The drone zipped low, blinking aggressively, mimicking human heat and movement signatures. The aliens opened fire immediately, their formation faltering. That was the only window they'd get. Rourke hit the trigger. The canyon floor exploded in a roar of shattering stone and fire. A quarter of the pathway collapsed, sending 3 of the brutes into the depths below. One clung to the edge, clawing for grip within human strength. Nilsson jumped the ridge and brought down the stolen plasma cutter onto its hand, severing it cleanly. The brute dropped, vanishing into the smoke. 2 remained, now separated, disoriented. Rourke and Garland opened fire in tandem. Armor cracked under focused bursts. One brute staggered, turned, and was met with a barrage from Mace, who had dragged himself up to a firing angle despite the blood soaking through his side. The round struck just above the chest plate, where the armor pulsed weakest. The brute reeled, then collapsed like a tower of meat and metal. The final one charged. It moved like a missile, shoulder down, cannon discarded, fist raised. Rourke ducked just as it barreled past, knocking aside stone and bodies in a blur of force. Nilsson leapt onto its back, screaming, jamming a knife into the neural seam behind its neck. The brute roared and spun, flinging him into the wreckage. Rourke moved. He grabbed the last remaining railgun shot, an unstable fusion round salvaged hours ago, and ran full tilt at the alien. It turned too late. Rourke jammed the muzzle against its gut and fired. The brute detonated from the inside out, shrapnel tearing the air, flinging Rourke backward with enough force to break ribs. He hit the ground hard, gasping, ears ringing. Silence followed. The kind that wasn't peace, just aftermath. When he came to, Garland was dragging him behind cover, blood pouring from his own nose. You alive? Barely, Rourke rasped. Mace was still breathing, though shallow. Nilsson groaned from the wreckage, but gave a shaky thumbs up. All 4 were alive, miraculously, and the brutes were dead. Rourke looked up at the sky. More dots burned into view. New landers, new enemies. The Galrun weren't done, But something had changed now. They had sent their best, and their best had been torn apart by wounded men with knives and hate in their eyes. In the orbiting command ship, Galrun commanders reviewed the footage in silence. One reached forward, paused a frame, Rourke standing over the broken corpse of a brute, jaw set, blood covering his armor. "This is not what we were told." A lower officer replied hesitantly. "They were supposed to be in retreat." "No," the commander said. "They were waiting." The transmission ended. On the ground, Rourke took a slow breath, pain blooming with every inhale. "They're scared now," Nilsson said quietly. "They should be," Rourke replied. "We're not done yet." Smoke curled above the battlefield like the breath of some ancient, wounded god. The surface of Irex 9 was scorched black, layered with shattered armor, scorched stone, and the mangled remains of both alien and human. The air was thin, metallic. The kind of air that stuck in your throat and reminded you just how close death always was. Sergeant Rourke moved slowly, not from hesitation, but because every nerve screamed with pain. He had lost feeling in his left arm. His ribs shifted with every breath. Blood dried into a stiff crust around his collar and neck. But he moved anyway, because he was still alive. And as long as one Green Beret was alive, the mission wasn't over. The others lay scattered behind him in the makeshift holdout, what was left of a collapsed fuel depot. Nilsson leaned against a pile of wreckage, one eye swollen shut, fingers twitching as he cleaned his last functioning weapon. Garland was breathing but unconscious, pulse shallow, his leg a twisted ruin. Mace was propped against a wall, Verline dripping fluid into his arm. He looked like a ghost. Still, he nodded when Rourke passed. That meant everything. No medevac was coming. No exfil. The warship in orbit hadn't responded to emergency codes. If Earth even knew they were alive, it wasn't doing anything about it yet. But the Galrun knew. They knew the humans hadn't just survived. They had dismantled elite commandos and brutes with nothing but ingenuity, rage, and tactics sharpened through decades of impossible wars. The cost had been high, but the message had been delivered. And still, the aliens returned. Another drop pod hit near the ridge, and the sound of retracting metal limbs echoed across the valley. This time, it wasn't soldiers. No weapons drawn. A single figure stepped through the dust. Tall, armored, unarmed. Rourke raised his rifle and steadied it against a pile of rubble. The targeting reticle danced across the alien's chest. The Galrun figure lifted both arms slowly, palms open. A universal sign. Surrender, or something close to it. Rourke didn't lower his rifle. "State your purpose," he barked. The alien responded in heavily modulated Terran. "You are not prey. You are not vermin. The Council reevaluates." Mace gave a dry cough behind him. "That sounds like fear." The Galrun's expression was unreadable under the polished faceplate. "We were told your kind died easily." "You were told wrong," Rourke replied. There was a pause, then the alien nodded slowly. "We saw the footage. Your tactics defy logic. Your team should have perished." "Funny thing about humans," Rourke said, rising to full height, ignoring the pain in his side. "We don't die when we're supposed to." The alien's gaze shifted toward the ruined battlefield, the hundreds of Galrun bodies scattered among the craters and ash. "What do you want?" Rourke considered the question. He could ask for safe passage, a ceasefire, medical supplies, all practical choices, all reasonable. But reason had burned out of him 2 days ago, when the first mocking transmission played over the comms, and a squad of Galrun soldiers laughed as they executed the last of the evac team. He didn't want truce. He wanted memory. "I want you to go back to your people," Rourke said, stepping closer, lowering his voice so the words cut sharper. "And I want you to tell them what happened here. Tell them that 4 wounded Green Berets held a moon against an empire. Tell them we used scrap and blood to bury your gods of war. Tell them we turned every joke into a grave." The alien said nothing for a long moment. Then it slowly turned and walked away, leaving no trail in the dust. Rourke stood there, breathing hard, vision blurring. Behind him, Mace chuckled softly. "Diplomatic as always, Sarge." Nilsson added, "Should have asked for food. Or at least socks." Rourke smiled faintly but didn't speak. Within the hour, the remaining dropships that had lingered in orbit began pulling back. No more troops landed. No more laughter crackled through the comms. The Galrun weren't retreating in panic. They were withdrawing with the kind of silence that meant something had shifted. Not tactically, culturally. They had looked at wounded, cornered men and seen monsters staring back. Days passed before a signal finally broke through the ion fog and reached Terran command. A recon drone, following a distress beacon, caught brief footage of the scene from orbit. What it saw defied the military predictions. One cratered battlefield, dozens of enemy bodies. For surviving Green Berets, Delta 9, presumed Kia, was marked alive. When the survivors were retrieved and medevaced back to a forward base weeks later, their story spread like a wildfire through black channels. Not all of it was official. Rumors filled the gaps where reports failed. Soldiers spoke of a canyon soaked in alien blood, of a soldier detonating an exosuit with his bare hands, of a team that killed silence itself. Rourke, even through the haze of recovery, gave a single statement. They laughed at us. That was all. And in the months that followed, something changed in the Galrun military. Engagement protocols were rewritten. Assault doctrine restructured. A new clause was quietly added to every briefing. Human special forces are to be avoided when wounded or outnumbered. They are most dangerous when dying. The council denied the clause existed, but every field officer saw it. Because on a dead moon in a forgotten sector, the myth of human weakness was buried under steel and fire. And Delta 9 had carved the epitaph with blood. Never underestimate the ones who've already lost everything. They're the ones who will never stop fighting. Not until you forget how to laugh.